Hello YouTube land, my name is KESTALKAYDEN and we are playing some Path of Exile. Today I'm going to be showcasing a build of mine, Righteous Fire Cycloner. Now I've done this build for the last couple leagues and it is pretty damn strong. I figured I'd try it again in Ritual League and it's not too bad. Now in the description and also at the bottom of the video there will be timestamps so you can actually go through to see and actually hear about certain aspects of this build. I'm going to get started by just jumping into a map, explain some of the things while playing the map, and then we'll go over our equipment, we'll go over our skill tree, we'll go over everything, including gems and why I did certain things over others, etc, etc. So this is a 20% Delirious City Square, and we have the Valdo mod for Harbies, and we also procced a Plague of Frogs Prophecy. I actually kind of forgot about that, but that'll actually work out to our benefit. So sorry about the initial lag when coming into this, but beyond that, this is actually a pretty good showcase of what this Righteous Fire can actually do. Now, I did my Series 7 on it. I'm working on Series 8 right now. I've done Maven 10, like I've done the 10 Maven thing for various areas and regions. Hey, it's an enhance. There are certain cons about this build, aside from it being a tanky jug, basically, even though it's a chieftain. It's certain degens it cannot do. So things like the Cirrus degen, it's very important to like stay away from certain things. But beyond that, it's pretty strong. Again, it's a pretty comfortable Cirrus killer, if not a very lengthy Cirrus killer. The biggest conquer issue that I have is Drox. I feel like the damage mitigation during his immunity phase, or not immunity phase, but like high reduction phase, is a little much. It can sometimes take a couple minutes to actually do like Drox at that level. But beyond that, it's pretty damn good. And we'll see what this actually looks like and feels like once we get to the Harby pack, which by the way is an amazing currency farmer. Like, if you can just keep on doing your Harby pack, I figured I'd actually stay in the Ice Nova. I don't know why I jumped away from that. But once you get that node, it is pretty damn strong. Keep in mind, I know that this is a tier 14, not a T16, but I also did juice it up. I have sextents on this, so we should be seeing Gloom Shrine, plus a couple of other things, which would be kind of nice. There are some benefits of going like Explodey versus Combs Glorious Plate. Oh, here it is. Let's just jump right into this and tra-la-la-la. Oh, jeez. So my frames might have dropped a little bit, but this is a very good example of what this build can handle. If I survive this, then that's a win for me, because we have Plague of Frogs, we have a whole ton of packs, we have Delirium in here, and also the Valdo's Rest nonsense. On a T14, with extra Harbies, with extra monsters everywhere due to sextents, we might have to come back for all this loot, but I might just like cherry pick like the ancient shards and some stuff. If anything, I might just find like a corner of the map and just explain the rest of the build, and then I'll go back to this afterwards. So yeah, this can pretty comfortably farm all of this. I'm just going to go a little bit further, and then we'll head back and kind of cherry pick things. So overall, while in combat, with flasks up, with, you know, everything else up, you have about 5,700 life regen a second, and that's including the degen. This is net gain, right? So it's actually a pretty good tanky build. Oh god, it's everywhere. Transition! Figured I'd actually continue the transition over here just because we actually did end up getting our Gloom Shrine. I finally picked up all this stuff. That took like a good extra couple of seconds there. Extra couple of minutes, if anything. It's a lot of currency. So I'm gonna pop this first. That's gonna explode. That's fine. We go back in, and we're also gonna pop the ritual while we're here. Like, this is a fairly comfortable playstyle, and you don't have to do much other than, like, you know, piano your flasks every now and then. And I'm not really voling if I don't have to. And in most cases, I don't. Now, with that said, damage-wise, we're at about 8.5 million, I believe. We could check the path of building afterwards. I'm currently working on a scepter, which will get me to about 10 million without needing to change my purity of fire to aspect of the spider, just to keep up with the tankiness. So basically, this is the boss. As soon as we get our Wave of Conviction onto all three of them, there we go. Actually, I guess I missed the top one there, but that's okay. That's bossing damage, so that's not too bad. It's pretty comfortable. Oh, hey, there's still Harpy packs in here. Now that we're back in my hideout, let's go over some of the gear that we have. To get started, we are using a Comb's Heart. Now, there is some instances where people would want to use maybe an explode chest for better clear. However, I didn't necessarily need this. This would probably drop down my health to about 8,000, then probably maybe add an extra 200-300 based off of that. So you'd probably be looking at about 8,200, 8,300 with decent armor. I didn't think that was necessary for this build, so we just kept it at Comb's Heart. The bread and butter of this build is in fact the replica series foible. Now with that said, this along with the Watcher's Eye Vitality Jewel, it did get a little bit of a nerf this league. However, it's still pretty damn good. There's nothing really else that can compare to it. Going to the helmet, this was actually pretty fun to craft, but because Harvest is back, it's actually a lot easier than most people think. Basically, you're slamming Essence of Horror, get your concentrated effect, get some decent life, and off you go. After that, you just see if you can get an open, what is that, suffix, and do fire, add fire, add remove fire, remove add fire, etc., until you get burning. Done. This is probably 15 exalts right now, and it costs maybe about 2 to craft or 3 to craft, but I got pretty lucky with my Essence of Horror, so don't think that that's a baseline for anything. My gloves are pretty basic. Because we're doing Chieftain and because we have that extra 100% fire resistance, we basically just don't have to worry about fire resistance anywhere in our gear or anything. So just pump out as much cold, lightning as you can. And if you have an opening suffix, which is usually what happens with this, you try to grab chaos resistance. I'm currently going through Harvestcraft right now to add remove chaos resistance until I can get a much higher number than 8%. Basically, this build will be able to be capped out on all percents by the end. This build is a very much, by the way, still work in progress, just because this is still, at least for me, pretty early in the league. And again, because this is a Warlord base, you can just get increased damage over time, which is a very nice thing to have on this. Heading over to the boots. Because we are using Dash and Second Wind, which, by the way, we don't necessarily have to. Our build, because of this right now, Scepter, by the way, 1.9 attacks per second, we could actually just do Leap Slam, faster attacks. However, I don't like the feel of Leap Slam sometimes. It gets stuck on a lot of things, especially still this league, even though it has been an issue for the last couple of leagues for me, regardless of whether I'm on Predictive or Lockstep. So we're on that. With that said, we are doing a Cyclone variant. So let's go over some of the links here. We need inspiration, so regardless, that needs to be used. We're using blind as well as divergent culling strike. So all that is when you're cycloning through, you gain an extra 2% life every time you cull an enemy, which is amazing for packs. It's amazing for sustain. We don't even necessarily need the Cinder Swallows Flask if it wasn't for the fact that enemies ignited during the Flask effect take 10% extra damage. Going through the rings, these are very basic rings. There's nothing really to, like, you know, go home about. What I do want to do is I want to add chaos resists onto either of those and make them even that much stronger. And if they do have another open suffix, maybe to add aspect of the spider, just for that, you know, extra bit that I need. Going over some of the defenses, even going actually back to this helmet, I could probably remove cold resist, add chaos resist to it to add a couple of extra exalts onto the price if I ever decide to sell it, or B, add aspect of the spider onto it, because I definitely don't need the extra 45 or 43 cold resist on that. This shield, although looks impressive, isn't necessarily what I need right now. What I do need to do, and do I have, I do not. I do, actually. I'd be able to, I think that's a prefix. I'd have to double check, but I think there's a max fire res on a prefix that I can just slam on this if I have augment fire. If not, I'll have to double check that. But ideally, that is something that you'd actually want to do to this, is to have the maximum fire resist, so then you can remove your, where is that? Remove your purity of fire, so you have room to add aspect to the spider. With that said, this build gets 5,600, I think, regen per second in combat, so it's pretty damn nice. Off to the scepter. This is nothing to write home about either. It basically just has damage over time. I don't even think it's the highest one that you can get. Oh, it is. Okay, so it has damage over time, and you just put fire damage over time on it. This is basically all that I needed. I know there's the extra fire damage, but it doesn't really actually do too much. Maybe adds like 3-4% onto that. One of the scepters that I'm currently working on, by the way, where is that? It's right here. Basically, all that you have is your T1 Warlord's burning damage, and because of Harvest, you can just keep prefixes and reforge suffixes. So you just keep going for that until you find either a increased or damage over time multiplier, another burning damage, or an increased fire damage, and I can instantly craft this better with harvest crafts and so forth and so on, to the point where it adds even an extra 20% damage on top of this, which is your best in slot. A lot of people actually like to use +1 fire, +1 all spells. That's actually not the way to go, at least not with this build. I actually calculated it on Path of Building, and it's actually better to do this. You actually get more damage from this, so I'd prefer to do it that way anyway. With the belt, this one was actually a little bit tricky, but I actually really enjoyed crafting it. Basically, look at all those lives. It was realistically just using pristine fossils over and over and over and over and over again until I had mostly everything I needed, and then I was able to augment slam twice with life, and I had to make sure to have one open suffix so I could regenerate 2% life during the flask effect. I actually do not know how much this is worth, but I'd say that I probably spent less than 2 exalts on it. So there's that. Mind you, again, that could be really lucky, and I also had double augment life, so that's, if you go to the Discord for that, it's probably an extra 2 exalts for that just alone. And that's if you're lucky. But that's about it. Aside from that, so the other link in here, obviously because this is an Elder Brute, is that it is a level 20 fortify. Flasks are your general setup. I don't even really feel the need to actually have a Quicksilver flask, so I could probably replace that with a Rumi's, but I wanted to keep freeze and poison, plus have a bleed on, like a remove bleed on command with my life flask. And that's pretty much generally what I use that for, other than when I'm running through a Harpy pack, I just kind of roll all 5 flasks just in case. But yeah, that's about it. And obviously Witchfire Brew for Despair Curse. If I had a double curse, I could probably run Flammability, but that's fine. And obviously this one, it's a great quality of life plus Ignite, which we do Ignite. With that said, let's actually go into this. Immortal Call, cast on damage taken. We have Wave of Conviction and Combustion. Now, people might be thinking, well, isn't that going to overwrite your Elemental Equilibrium? Yes, it will, but because we have Cyclone, and because we, what is it? Cyclone 6 times a second, basically, or whatever that nonsense number is, it basically overwrites that, but it still provides the benefits of combustion, as well as it does actually add exposure. So it's a really nice quality of life, and it is really damn good. Let's head over to the Path of Building now. Is that big enough? Actually, I should mention, just before doing anything else, that some of the mods to actually look out for when mapping are Curse with Elemental Weakness. This build can do it, but it's a little bit squishier. 5,500 regen goes to about maybe 2,000, so avoid that. Less or no regen, obviously for the same reason, and Ellie Reflect. So I'm just moving this around. Skill tree. It's your pretty basic skill tree. I can go over some of the reasons why doing any of this. This is a level 95 character. If you get it to level 98, I definitely suggest going to here and then looking for a Transcendent Mind. Reason for that is your damage will go up quite a bit. There are some instances where you could actually get away with removing things like dexterity. If you like, for example, leap slam and faster attacks, you could definitely remove this dexterity and then add an extra point right here for just that little extra life. This build can actually, even if I didn't have this, if I were to min-max and get all my harvest crafts in, I could get this to probably do about 11,000 HP. so it's pretty beefy, pretty strong. You definitely have things like elemental overload and elemental equilibrium. Those are your bread and butter. They add quite a bit of damage. You have your, again, quick recovery. Every single jewel that you have is basically looking for a couple things: increased life, burning damage, and cold and lightning res, so you don't have to basically worry about it. And it's that simple. There are other things you can get on top for that little extra, but these cost like 5-10 chaos each when I got them, so they weren't that big. And I think all of mine are pretty much the same, right? It's just to fill out resists, and that's it. One of the things that we do get is call to arms, because our war cries are instant, so basically that's why I have my war cry on my left click. It just keeps on generating tons and tons of endurance charges, plus it's a good quality of life because it regains like however much it regains per second. Let me go back to that just so I can double check our enduring cry. It regains 2,000 life over a second every time it goes off, which is every 8 seconds, sure, but like it doesn't matter. Plus it gains obviously endurance charges and a whole bunch of other stuff. So basically you'd be focusing on life, endurance charges, things like maximum fire res, and so forth and so on. And again, it looks like it wasn't as high as I thought, but you're basically looking at 5,300 life regen per second. If it wasn't for the nerf to the Watcher's Eye, as well as the nerf to the Atziri's Foible, or the replica Atziri's Foible, you'd probably be looking over 6,000 life regen a second like it was last league. And it still feels good though, let me tell you. This build still feels good. Now you might be asking yourself, why do we have such nonsense stuff here? Well, there are a lot of things ticked off. It might look a little insane, but I can go through all of these. So let me just untick everything and go over why certain things happen. Because normally there's a lot of like people who are like, oh, that's a path of building where blah, 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 blah. Well, no, it actually does go through. So Vaal Righteous Fire without anything, if you just flick it on for whatever reason, if you wanted to, 2 million. That's not useful. Let's say an enemy hits you, and going over here, generally, if something hits you hard enough, it's a melee hit. Where is that node? Yeah, it was here. So 15% of physical damage taken from hits is as fire damage. So let's just calculate this out. Taken damage from enemy hit recently. Fire damage, yes. If you take a big enough hit, your wave of conviction goes off, which means it's a fire exposure type, which means that you lose an endurance charge, which means that you are ignited, or that the enemy is ignited and burning. So automatically, as soon as you take a hit with nothing else, your flasks are up, sorry, I left those on, but if you take nothing else, then so be it. As soon as you hit your Cyclone button, bam, done. You're at 5 million because you overwrite the fire damage taken, done. You have endurance charges again. You also have inspiration charges as soon as you Cyclone. So automatically that puts you at 7.2 million. One of the things that you do, because we are trying to overwrite our, elemental equilibrium, physical damage as extra lightning damage. So our Cyclone is lightning based damage, which means that it actually has a chance to shock, if I do recall correctly. It's a 15% chance to shock, but because of how many times it hits, chances are you're going to get your shock off by the time you need it anyway, because you're just cycloning through the enemies until they hit you, and then you can launch your Vaal RF, which deals a ludicrous amount of damage. So basically that brings it down, or brings it up to that. If you are in fact using your flasks as they are, the sulfur flask right there, then you will have your on ground effect. They will also be there as well, but that doesn't really affect anything. And then the last piece is, where is that? Right here. Cover rare or unique enemies in ash for 10 seconds on hit. Boom. There you go. It looks like it's a lot, but realistically this is pretty consistent, and as long as you have your Vaal Righteous Fire up, you'll be fine. And again, this is 2 million, but that again is with all your flasks. If you didn't have your flasks, it would be less, 1.6. So if you didn't have any flasks, but you managed to get everything off, you're still looking at 7.4 million Shaper DPS if you don't have any flasks during battle. And there are a lot of cases where you don't finish the boss the first time around, depending on the mods on the map, depending on if, they can't be hexed, depending on whatever. It takes a little bit longer, sure, but this is a pretty tanky, pretty stable build, pretty consistent build. Now, the reason why I created this build is, again, it's usually a comfort pick for me. I usually do this. I do Vortex, Occultist, which, by the way, I'm excited to try next because that got a bit of a buff. And for end league, I usually do Cast on Crit because it's Cast on Crit and Harvest is back, and why wouldn't I do that? Again, this build isn't really at the end game yet. It will be end game, but just not yet. So there's a lot of things that you could do to add on to this. Anyway, that's about it out of me. This build is a work in progress, but it's able to handle most content just fine with the changes to my scepter. And if I drop down a few levels of dash, which is fine, I can remove certain things, add certain things. If I fix my shields, I can then remove Purity of Fire, go into Aspect of the Spider. My 9.3 million with the Aspect of the Spider should probably turn to about 11 with the changes to my scepter. That'll probably be 13, 14 million sheer DPS, which is respectable. Now, leveling wise, it's not too bad of a process. I would recommend probably waiting until about level 50, unless you know what you're doing. Now, leveling is fine as long as you do Cyclone, Cast while channeling, and your Purifying Flame Inspiration. That will be a good start to help you off with your energy or life regen needs. I would definitely recommend getting a Replicate Series Foible ASAP, as well as a Righteous Fire 2120 at minimum. It's not that big of a difference, but realistically, that's the thing that you'll be going for. Crafting this is pretty easy if at very beginning, at very least, you don't necessarily have to use an Essence of Horror, as that can get pretty expensive at like 15, 20 chaos a pop. You can just go for an Elder Helmet, look for Burning Concentrated with a life, and go from there. And again, certain bosses are very hard to do. I'd say Drox is actually a lot harder than Cirrus, just basically because of his immunity phase that he has. But beyond that, this is a pretty fun build, and I played every single league, so there you go. I actually might create a build guide for this onto the forum soon, so if you're interested in asking questions, feel free to ask down below, or if I link it, I will put it in the description, so you can check that out as well as the very different like path of building trees that I have, because I've saved all of them throughout. I'm going to include the end game one for now. If you guys want other path of buildings, I will answer that in the description and comments down below. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed. Leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel, leave a like on the video, and don't forget the most important part, have fun.